it seemed poignant to both of us to discuss what being in local government or running for attempting to be in local government looks like in these times.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what came up for me, I had a conversation earlier with Michael Songster, who's like doing the treasurer thing for my campaign, and it's been really strange navigating these times for all of us, obviously, and it's also weird to think of how running for commission is still a priority in the context of all this, and what makes sense to push for, because that whole platform that we've developed was developed under the assumption that we'd continue to generally have a basic infrastructure in place, that we would try to get better at distributing more equitably and things. I think that you and I kind of share a lot of that vision of what we want the community to look like and what we think is possible. So what do we do in these times? What do we hold center in navigating these times is, I think, part of what we talked about wanting to cover, as well as this idea of what comes after. And so like when we get through this time, hopefully, without a bubble in sickness or chaos, hopefully we're able to kind of steadily navigate something that slowly is resolved. But however this goes, we'll end up on the other side of the coronavirus shelter-in-place scenarios. And I've been kind of imagining like two paths. One is where institutions kind of take austerity measures and kind of gravitate towards attrition to try to make up for what was lost economically and things, and try to get things back how they were. And I think another way is to take a lot of these changes we're putting in place now and say, well, how can we continue them to produce like an alternative way of organizing our society and producing and distributing resources. So that was a very long preface, I guess, to maybe then hand it off to you if there's any place you want to start from there, and certainly if anybody has questions, anytime.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we've seen governments around the country take action to put like moratoriums on evictions, to do things that help protect our incarcerated population, through releasing prisoners and incarcerated folks that have limited time left on their sentences or deemed not being a risk to society, or folks that are being held pre-trial so that they can go home to shelter in place. And I think those two in particular, protecting low-income folks that might experience housing insecurity because of arguably parasitic relationships with their landlords, the fact that we have a criminal justice system that disproportionately impacts low-income and communities of color, those kinds of steps to help make those communities whole are things that I'm hoping that local government can take immediately. I mean, we've already put a moratorium on evictions, like the magistrate court judge has. But I've urged my colleagues to put pressure on the local court system and the sheriff's office to start letting people out of jail, because they shouldn't. We shouldn't have a jail here in general. We should be doing everything we can in general, and have stated before that one of our goals is to reduce jail midnights in any way we can. And I think we're working towards that. But the uniqueness of this moment is giving rise to more urgency to actually follow through on some of those steps that we've expressed interest in doing so far. And these are things that I think that maybe we should consider seeing if we can get doing the ones all this happens, because we're seeing how much it matters. We're seeing how much it impacts folks. We're seeing that if we get creative, we can take action to implement solutions that a lot of people have told us we can, or they're too far-fetched to try in the sky. So those are just a couple examples for me. But what do you think about things that we could be doing right now that to help get people through this crisis, but ultimately are taking us towards what the world should be like anyway?
I mean, plenty of thoughts, but one that came up for me that was, I think, especially poignant and to me feels kind of obvious is the point about how we're trying to get as many people as possible out of the jail right now, and that raises to me the question of, well, why did they ever need to be there in the first place? And why wouldn't we just generally do that? So I think of, there's this very kind of radical sounding idea of prison abolition. And I think what that really looks like is, well, how much sense does it make to have a system that's locking people in cages as a response to a variety of behaviors that are kind of like disproportionately, if not arbitrarily, enforced. And I'd like to think that, one way forward from this is to see it as just kind of like obviously unnecessary and unhelpful to be putting people in jail in the first place, and that this could maybe serve as a reference point for decriminalization and legalization measures, and for really moving towards, what I historically as an activist have called prison abolition, but what I really think it aligns very well with what a lot of people think of as like criminal justice reform, and we could break down the language about using terms like criminal injustice and reform, all of which there are arguably better alternatives for. But yeah, I guess that's one big thing that really sticks out to me. Another one is, with evictions, I'd like to think from a non-policy standpoint, there's an opportunity here to build solidarity, like across class, where people who own property and buildings can see the humanity in the people who rent from them, and vice versa, and have kind of a human level conversation about, like, housing as a basic need. And and maybe what I'd love to see the commission move on actually is try to find a way to suspend rent payment for a couple months. Like if there was a way to pass a policy that just disallowed collection of rent for the months of April and May, or however long we think makes sense, if we're citing coronavirus as the reason. But what I imagine, and I'd love your thoughts on this, Mariah, is that at the very least, the mayor and commission could pass a resolution that just encourages everyone who owns property and rents it to waive rent voluntarily for a couple months. And maybe that doesn't get everyone or even most people who own property to do that, but it can kind of plant that seed to sort of see a different relationship moving forward. And I'd like to see what can maybe grow from that on like a human community level, as well as what we might be able to use as mandates moving forward on a policy level. But yeah, I'm curious your thoughts on those things.
No, I mean, I definitely think that at the least issuing a resolution, I mean, like using our influence as folks with a public mandate to, legislate on their behalf to communicate with landlords what our values are as a community and what our needs are right now, and urge them to do so. I've also written a resolution in support of the United Campus Workers and the measures that they've called on from the University of Central Georgia to make sure all employees, regardless of hourly status, get full, paid leave if they need it, or, continue to be paid at regular hours. I think that putting pressure on folks, it works, it matters. It shows people that we are, like, with them, and we have a lot louder voices than I think people are sometimes willing to use or willing to realize that we have in matters like this. And so resolutions are in our toolkit for a reason, and I think we should use them, particularly around rent relief agreements, and to show solidarity with workers whose employers are not taking into account what their immediate needs are during this time.
Do you mind? I'd love to actually ask a question. I know that y'all in the meeting on Thursday allocated $3 million from what was going to be the prosperity package money toward relief efforts, and it's kind of just generally earmarked right now for three things. And in my mind, it's going to be really important to look at the details moving forward for how that money is allocated, because in my mind, $3 million sounds like a ton of money to me, but like on the budgetary level, and when you're spreading it out among 123,000 people or more in the broader area, doesn't go very far. So I imagine like the best way to spend that is on the people who are most vulnerable, which is kind of who the prosperity package was meant for in the first place. And I was skeptical when I saw that it was kind of divided into thirds, and one of those thirds was like business relief. Because while it's true that like, you know, small business owners don't have access to unemployment and so are arguably like quite vulnerable in this time, similar to many workers. But really the workers in those businesses and plenty of other businesses that are more stable, many of whom are working for cash or tips and are going to have a hard time actually proving their income to ever get the kind of relief that will come through typical mechanisms. How can we make sure that like the money that's allocated in that fund gets to the people who most need it, knowing that the people who most need it are going to have the hardest time documenting it, and the more qualifications we require for people to like apply for that aid or get it, the harder it's going to be for them to get it, and the fewer people who most need it will actually get it. Is that kind of a clear, albeit long question?
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely a concern of mine. Also, as well as, you know, propping up the nonprofit industrial complex in our city by distributing funds mostly to folks that are providing relief in the form of food or diapers, but in a way prescribing how this money is to be used rather than giving the agencies to the people themselves to decide, you know, what their needs are and how best to ameliorate them. And so the first thing I'll say is that I think we really need to prioritize workers in whatever our response is. I know a lot of small businesses are, you know, very valuable to our community, but they do have, in some instances, lines of credit or assets that they've drawn upon in order to create the business in the first place. And they are, you know, making money by, in some way, siphoning the wealth that's created by the folks that keep the doors open, that keep the floors mopped and the drinks pouring and the pancakes flipping and everything like that. And so I just want to make sure that in our response, we are censoring those that actually create that wealth and that are you know, being hard hit by lots of tips and things like that. I'd be interested in exploring whether or not under this emergency declaration we may be able to get around the gratuities clause that prevents us from directly distributing money to folks in need as a way of getting through some of this red tape and making sure that they're, you know, self-sufficient without reliance upon nonprofits specifically for some of their emergency relief.
I have a thought on that if you're interested.
Sure.
Yeah. So so my understanding is the gratuities clause doesn't allow the government to just give money directly to people. But you can give it directly to an organization who gives it directly to people. And so I think of basically just the earmarking process looking different than it typically does, where the way you define it is, you know, this money is being given to this organization specifically to provide direct financial aid to people who meet a certain criteria. And then I think define that criteria pretty specifically in terms of like someone's economic situation, but the actual application process for people is incredibly simple, and it's basically kind of like name, address, tell your story. And to some degree that basically makes people kind of fall in the honor system, and a few people will probably exploit that. But I don't see any better way to ensure that the people who most need it will have access, because it's not just workers, it's also people who are already unemployed or people who are already unhoused. And it's not just workers who have like formally recognized employment, but it's people who do these cash jobs, or, you know, they're the door people and sound people at shows, or especially undocumented workers. Like, I think a lot about the thousands of people in this town who literally have no way of ever getting money from the federal government's aid, and like that's like a huge gap I think we could make up. So I mean, maybe enlighten me if I'm wrong about whether what I just described is possible, but then if that is possible, you know, how viable do you think it is to like turn that $3 million allocation that y'all have already kind of set aside into something that looks like what I just described?
I think it's entirely possible. I've heard various arguments before about whether or not the mechanism you described is in violation of the gratuities clause. I think, again, I mean, it's just a matter of what kind of language we use to describe how we're acting and how weird might make it that we are intending to violate state law. I think that, there's other instances where our city attorney has been really creative with figuring out solutions that work out well for everyone, both at the Capitol and here in Athens. And so I'm really glad that you brought up the other folks that are impacted that might not have access to kinds of documentation, be it, paycheck stuff or documentation that is, can be the country, whatever sorts of formalities might exist that could harm their chances of accessing the aid if they need it. And we need to be thinking about those folks too, absolutely. But I like the idea of having it be, to an extent, somewhat qualitatively decided, because, rather than saying, I have this income, this is my taxes to pay, and this is the amount of children I have, and this is my rent, and, put the burden on those folks that are already really stressed out to file some paperwork in order to get some relief. Basing it upon, something narrative-based. I think that's absolutely something we should consider doing.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Well, I'm excited to see where that might go, and I avail myself as a resource to help develop it if you and others on the mayor and commission body would like my help. I do want to say, it looks like someone from New York City, Carol Crowley. Hello. Good evening to you as well. I guess there's been a bunch of people kind of in and out of this. Please chime in with questions or thoughts if you'd like to share them. In the meantime, Mariah and I can just keep cutting it up here. But there's one more thing on the local resolution that I'm curious about. And I had written to y'all. Of course, I think y'all were inundated with feedback from people in writing before the meeting on Thursday. But there was a clause, I think it was like number 13 on the second thing y'all passed, that's waiving alcohol and business license fees for local businesses, or for businesses period, in 2021. And I guess I'm curious if you know and could elaborate on where that came from and what the thinking is behind that, because my response to that was, well, like this doesn't provide aid to anyone until at least 9 months from now. So why are we jumping the gun on this now when there isn't time to really discuss it, when there may be better ways to sort of alleviate pressure on local businesses without treating all businesses the same, because I imagine like Applebee's will have an easier time paying their liquor license than like your average local bar. And then also like, that's an example of kind of taking money out of the general fund that's already going to be strained after we get through this, when we're looking to be able to put more money into like back to the people, and especially the most vulnerable people like we've been talking about. So do you know anything about like maybe a combination of like how much money that is and like where that proposal came from and what folks are imagining it'll do?
Yeah, so I think in our urgency to try to figure out solutions, we were just kind of looking at all the things that we as a local government that we could rely upon, and the fees and taxes that we collect from businesses for like licensure, etc. was just something that people immediately turn to. It's something within our power. In a time that feels like there's not a lot in our power, or not really getting a lot of help from the state or federal government. So what can we do? I think that's something that jumped out to management as like one of our immediate tools that are within our control. I agree that it does seem kind of strange that it's the effects of it will be felt so far out, but really in the long scheme of how long this crisis might be upon us, it isn't really that long. I think the effects of this are going to be felt for a long time, and so taking somewhat of a forward-looking approach towards the difficulties that businesses are going to have down the road might be part of the impetus to look towards that kind of solution.
I guess what I would caution against maybe is like, if we're going to take forward-looking approaches, I think it's wonderful, right? Like that's a lot of what we're talking about, right? It's like, how can we get eviction reform out of this time, and how can we get better infrastructure that meets the needs of the most vulnerable people in this time? I guess I'm cautious of things that get passed very rapidly. When there isn't like an immediate result from that thing that gets passed. I mean, I'm cautious of things that get passed very rapidly, period, but there's clearly a need right now to respond with a sense of immediacy around like arresting the spread of the virus, right? But and I'm really glad, for example, that the thing that y'all did pass, while it's worded as a mandate, doesn't include any fining of or incarcerating of people who might be found in violation, and there's a specific tasking of police to not engage with folks except like verbally through a megaphone, right? I think that was really encouraging. But I think you're right that we're going to feel the effects of this for a long time to come. I just imagine that things that we see as like a solution that could happen in 2021, like that gives us at least 9 months to think about the best way that could look without having to pass those measures today, you know? So was that like, was the thinking that would like signal something, or?
Well, I mean, and I want to make clear that in the final version of the ordinance that was passed, that was taken out.
Oh, it was?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
So in the next week, so that was an option that's on the table.
Okay.
But we decided to look at economic relief as like a whole package of like what, you know, thinking more carefully about things we brought up, like, you know, revenue loss and the way this will impact the local economy, the way this will either, you know, like to what degree this will help local businesses. And so all those recommendations are coming back to us next Friday.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. I guess maybe was it removed before the meeting started? Is that why it didn't get discussed during the meeting?
We had a version. I'm not sure when they updated it online, but we had a version that was like on our desk when we got there.
Okay.
So, you know, maybe we're not doing the best we can during these times. Like letting the public know because things are moving really quickly. But I just wanted to like make that clear. Like as a concept, I think it's really important to debate, like whether or not this will be actually helpful for businesses. But it's not, that it has not actually gone through yet.
Okay,
it may or may not, you know, require next voting meeting.
And so this speaks to the fascinating position where, like, I, as someone who's paying pretty scrutinous attention now and have been for a long time, and who's also like trying to be there, I just don't have the same access to information that you and the other 10 people on the mayor and commission body do on a regular basis, right? And so that also speaks to the challenge of like, how do we keep people looped into this conversation as it's evolving so rapidly when everyone has different limitations on how they can engage and how much capacity they have to engage. So, I mean, thank you very much for clarifying that. And also, I'm really encouraged to hear that occurred. We have a question. Antonio Garcia asks, how are local moratoriums passed? I'm guessing that Antonio is referring to the moratorium on eviction and whether that was a mayor and commission action or a court action.
That was a court action.
That was a court action. Okay. Was that with y'all encouraging it? Like, did y'all play a role in that, or was that just something they did all on their own?
Yeah, I mean, that was with both our encouragement and some conversation between the magistrate court judge and folks at the higher levels about, you know, what powers we have for getting around certain laws under the state of emergency. So, I mean, it just kind of proves that, like, those conversations that we as commissioners can have with other elected officials, with other institutions or entities to kind of like use our leverage and our influence to get people to do the right thing. Like, it's powerful. We can make a lot happen just through like showing where our support is.
Can the mayor and commission enact a moratorium as well? Like, could you all extend it, or would it have to be the courts independent of you?
I think it would have to be the courts independent of us.
Okay. Do you think there's room to expand upon it, given like conversations you've been a part of so far?
Yeah, I think so. Definitely, I think so.
Cool. Well, Antonio, I hope that did accurately answer your question, and if not, then please follow up. Also, it looks like they shared. I'm with Jesse that passing things hastily, especially as a law, can be worse or have worse effects sometimes than doing nothing or waiting based on strategy, etc. Cool. Thanks. I'm glad you shared that. I guess while we're waiting on Oh, okay. There's another question, a follow-up from Antonio. Can you talk about home rule and local power?
Can you say more about that, Antonio?
Yeah. I'm guessing this is speaking to the idea of how much autonomy local governments have in deciding how we run things, but
yeah, which in my opinion we should have a lot more of.
Yeah, although then that raises the interesting question of like what, some of what we have on the federal level is how we can think safeguards in place, right? Or so that there's this like interesting balance of like how do we have more home rule without enabling like Oglethorpe County, right? We had Taylor Salters hit somebody with his car, loses his job as a result, which I think was the right call, and then is enthusiastically hired and celebrated for it by Oglethorpe County, a week later. And so like how do we keep a community that's run by someone who shares the views of the Oglethorpe County Sheriff from doing like explicitly racist and awful things that are opposite of what we want to do here if we go in the direction of a lot of freedom for like a lot of flexibility for local governments to decide more. I'm curious your thought. I mean, you're studying this even more and more professionally than I, so I'm curious your thoughts on that, Mariah.
Well, I mean, I just think that the people should, and their communities should have the most freedom over themselves as we can possibly enact, with regard for each other, with regard to what makes our community safest and thrive the best. But, I try anywhere I can to implement certain kinds of direct democracy in the sense of having a lot of input, having a lot of transparent sharing of resources between like the managed office and myself and constituents and things like that. And I think that ultimately we can't really control what other people in other communities do. We can set a good example and show how and why a loving and care-oriented way of governing and living together works best. But it's our responsibility to first and foremost make sure that our community is strong and safe, so that then we can go out and help other places by expanding our capacity by first and foremost making sure we're good. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of my personal philosophy regarding like the way that the local government could operate maximally, and the way that we should just like care about each other and where our concerns should lie regarding where to start with making the world better.
Yeah, and I feel like that dovetails well with this thought I have that kind of came up for me while you were speaking, which is that like home rule, that word rule, like it sort of implies like this, there's this authority that's like enforcing things upon everyone. And if we think of power as a shared endeavor that we kind of like collectively build and distribute or like ignore and dissolve, and I think some of the most powerful things we can see the local government doing now is like seeking alternative ways to distribute resources, and kind of shifting the paradigm around who gets them and for what reasons, and being a bit more unconditional and or prioritizing the most vulnerable. I think that speaks to kind of the idea of like you don't necessarily need to mandate as much if you're investing with a different set of priorities. So like I think of like, we invested a ton of money from the latest SLOST into building a larger municipal center to house even more court cases. But maybe an alternative approach is to not fund that and see that as like, oh, like we are overstretched, so maybe we need to put fewer people through the court system in the first place. Like going back to the idea of like how do we have less people in the jail? So I guess that's where my thought ended for now. It does remind me. My friend Nene, who does a lot of organizing in town, likes to quote this. I think it's a Hawaiian mantra of where attention goes, energy flows, and that's kind of like a healer, almost like woo sounding maybe phrase. But when we think of that in terms of like how political power and resource distribution plays out, you know, this to me comes back to like how we approach this crisis and how we approach government in general is like, where is our attention? What are we holding center? And if we're really holding center the most vulnerable people in every decision, we'll start to flow that energy or those resources, that capital or that physical infrastructure to those people more, instead of to the institutions that kind of like reinforce that marginalization, you know? You know, that like that.
Oh, hi, Russell.
Oh, go ahead, please.
Oh, no, Russell just joined. Russell Edwards, so I wanted to wave at him.
Hey, Russell, we have another commissioner on the thread. If anybody wants to give a shout out to Russell, thanks for joining. I've been thinking about the hand sanitizer stations that are being currently prioritized to go to like tent cities, you know, where there's these like more like permanent or semi-permanent encampments of folks who don't otherwise have a structure to live in. And it's fascinating to think, well, we have that ability to do that now, which kind of speaks to the fact that we had that ability all along. And so like, like why are we not providing that kind of direct investment for people more regularly rather than funneling it through other institutions, you know? Those are deployed. Cool. So we've got them. Awesome. So that makes me think like, let's like keep them deployed, right? Like there's a perfect example of like, how do we use this as an example of doing things differently in the future? Like, let's keep doing that kind of stuff, even when coronavirus isn't forcing us all to think extra hard about this. Cool. Well, if anybody has more questions or thoughts, please share. I guess we could bring it back to, you had some things that you said you might want to ask me about, Mariah. I know I kind of asked you some pointed questions about the thing y'all passed, but if you have thoughts for me.
We did talk a little bit about predictions earlier, and so an idea that you're running on that I'm really interested to work with you on is the idea of a tenant bill of rights. I was wondering if you wanted to talk about what that is and why we need it for folks who might not know.
Totally, yeah. So a tenant's or a renter's bill of rights is the kind of thing that's been passed in other cities and states, in other countries. It plays out very differently. Russell's asking where the guitar is. I did a live stream last night playing some music.
What's up the guitar in a second?
Well, right now I'm sort of thinking like I'll do music stuff on a separate one, and you know, but maybe they'll merge one. The plan, if events are happening again, the plan was for Mariah's project, Waiting on Reparations, and my project, Gift Economy, and some others to be at an election night party on May 19th at Little Kings. So we've got the venue booked. Assuming that venues are a thing again on May 19th, then we'll hopefully be doing it then at least. But so anyway, tenants' bill of rights. I love eggs. Do you want to give eggs a spot?
Eggs, this is my cat, Eggs.
Oh.
Sorry, I love making them dance. Anyway,
I love eggs. So tenants' bill of rights. So I don't know all the details of how we can pass a tenants' bill of rights in Georgia that looks entirely similar to what we see in other cities, states, and countries. And part of that is like kind of my lack of access to the same kinds of resources that people on the commission might currently have. You know, you have an attorney that you can say, please figure this out for us. My understanding is we can't, for example, include rent control or like a cap on how much can be charged for rent, or restrictions on how that can increase or decrease over time. But there are lots of other things that we can do, I'm fairly sure, around like conditions of a living space. A couple of examples would be if you're living in a rented space and things are breaking or broken and your landlord won't fix them, in other communities, you have the legal right to fix it yourself and then just deduct it from your rent. And basically, like, let's say, like, the landlord won't fix the leak in the roof, so I call the roofing company, they come fix it, and they charge $600 for it. And then I pay $200 in rent and give them a receipt for $600 from the roofing company. And that's my rent payment, right? So that's one of kind of a bunch of examples. I'd be happy to elaborate on more specifics if you or others want them. But I think there are a lot of things like that that we can put in place that would protect people who are renting in terms of their quality of life, as well as being able to retain their housing. And I'd really like to figure out what the next best thing into like rent control is for thinking about affordable housing, and how do we keep people living in their spaces affordably, as like the cost of housing keeps going up in this town, but wages don't. And I love that Russell likes the idea of living conditions being a good angle. Do you have thoughts on that, Mariah, or more questions before? It looks like we had another question from Antonio, but did you want to hear more about renters' rights or give your thoughts?
I mean, I definitely was interested in exploring means of seeing what we can do with regards to the quality of living issues and protections that you described. I don't think that's an angle that we've talked about a lot in local government, just because our understanding of Russell says building inspection, change to state law. I'm not sure what he means, but hopefully it elaborates. But and I know another part of your platform is including, doing zoning changes and things like that to ensure that all large-scale developments have some sort of affordable housing component moving forward. It's something that is well within our control and something that I've been advocating for, working with developers. And so it'd be great to have another person on the commission that's fighting for something similar. Russell says, get rid of rent control preemption at state level. Yeah, pass the resolution to get our local legislative delegation to do that. Yeah,
totally.
Yeah.
I would love to be on the commission with y'all in a year talking about entirely new things, because like all this stuff gets passed in the meantime.
Yeah, we'll try to get it done, and then you come in and you can, that'll be great.
But maybe a couple other things I'd love to think about. Yeah, so you talked about the idea of like mandating affordable housing as like for developments of a certain size. I think there's definitely a lot of room for that, as well as redevelopment. I think there's room for redevelopment restrictions or like requirements. And eviction reform is another thing we can look at. So the conditions under which someone can be evicted can be regulated on the local level. We'll see where we can go in terms of like being able to prevent more evictions, period. But at the very least, like requiring notice and saying that you can only be served your eviction, or like someone has to give you a specific day and time they're going to be there, instead of right now they can just give a time window. Like at some point between July 17th and August 2nd, we'll be there to evict you, and you're kind of living in this like fear day to day that whole time.
Yeah.
But we can pass a law that would, a local ordinance that would require that they give specific time. Like we're going to be there on July 19th at 2 p.m., which enables, people to prepare more. But ultimately, I think the best things are the things that enable people to not face eviction in the first place. And another thing I'm really excited about is to look at alternative zoning designations. So I've been calling this a co-housing designation. But as you know, and I know you've already committed to to getting rid of the single-family ordinance in town. But I think when we think about what affordable housing can look like, finding a way to build up this density or this multi-person living situations, while perhaps like providing certain incentives for people to like build in more affordability or collective space. And so what I think of is like if there were like a multi-family co-housing designation, and it's basically like if there's like no limit on the number of people that can live in a building if they're all sharing ownership of it. It's kind of like the baseline idea. And so it's sort of like incentivizes getting away from this tenant-landlord relationship, and it looks a little bit more like how a land trust model would look. But there can still be ownership in the community, right? So there's like a communal ownership of that space on a bit more of an individuated level than like a big entity like the land trust would be. So there's more autonomy for people to form family units or community or their tribe or whatever. And kind of build that that wealth equity without playing into the typical kind of capital market that drives up housing costs and pushes people out, both because they can't afford the rent, but also because the neighbors stop being able to afford their own mortgages and taxes.
I think it's a really interesting and nice idea.
Yeah, I'm so excited to talk about all these ideas. Should we take this question from Antonio? I think we're a bit behind on the comments.
Okay, yeah, sure. Let's get back to some of the questions over here. Let me try to see this.
Antonio says,
the first one, Athens-Clarke budget has more focus on aesthetics and safety and addressing safety of communities. So where are priorities of county and leadership to address constituents under platform of government transparency? I think I speak a little bit to this because while I was serving, in the throes of my first year of my first term when the SPLOST list was getting compiled. And it was after the fact a lot of people realized that not all community needs, and particularly a lot of marginalized community needs, were reflected in the composition of the list. And I think that's really it's imperative that we as commissioners and we as community organizers be very proactive in organizing our communities to have that say, to have that conversation about what this looks like, to get our ideas on lists like that so that it ends up reflecting what the community actually wants. Because if they're never even asked, they've never even engaged in the process of helping put that list together, then what you end up getting might not reflect community needs as much as we would like. And so it really has to do with like grassroots organizing for making sure that people are involved in these democratic processes. And something that I honestly don't did well during the SPLOST process, and something I hope I can do better in the future.
Wow, I appreciate you punctuating it with that, because I was actually going to say this might be one of the things we disagree on a little bit. I don't know how much I'll find myself at odds with potential future colleagues, but there were parts of that SPLOST process that I felt pretty personally at odds with. I didn't like that there was a pretty robust participation from the community, and then there was this committee that recommended against the Classic Center, and then we saw the mayor and commission just put that back on anyway. I do wish that the mayor and commission had heeded the recommendation of their citizens advisory committee on that. I think there are a lot of better ways to have spent that. I think it was like $40 million. So yeah, I'm excited to see hopefully that play out differently and better in the future. I see Antonio saying you can circumvent and help affordable housing. Okay, yeah, this is, I think we kind of covered that with getting rid of the single family ordinance. I think is the first step toward that. And you're on board with that still, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you know why? So I'm actually, and I'm not expecting you to be able to answer for like the whole commission here, but being involved in Athens for Everyone for years, we put out these questionnaires, and I was really excited in helping work to get, you and a lot of the others, that kind of everybody who won last time around, we endorsed, which was really great. And they, I think universally had agreed to a number of things that haven't happened yet, including marijuana decrim, the ban on plastic bags, and getting rid of repealing the single family ordinance. So without delving into the other two right now, but is there traction on actually repealing that? Like, can that happen tomorrow?
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if one of the reasons why we haven't moved more swiftly on that is the package of reforms that were assigned to the Planning Commission for review, of like looking at ways that we can improve our zoning processes and other mechanisms by which we can ensure more affordable housing. So a lot of us have been waiting a long time to get those recommendations back before kind of moving ahead with like sweeping set of policy changes to help bolster the amount of affordable housing that exists in the community. And so I'm looking forward to seeing that getting passed along with that suite of recommendations. But that's not a thing really. I mean, other than just like priorities regarding, we've been doing a lot of work on criminal justice reform. We've been doing a lot of economic development stuff, and things fall into the cracks sometimes. But I think that if there's one reason why we may have held off on it, it's probably that.
Would it be possible, do you think, to pass a moratorium on enforcing the single-family ordinance under the emergency powers? You know, while people are currently seeking shelter, they're welcome to seek it in places that are zoned single-family.
Yeah, I wonder if we could.
I mean, I think that'd be a great use of this time. And then, you know, once it has room to be a priority again, and we get through the obviously like more immediately pressing things, you know, work on that suite of like housing policy reforms. But you know, before marriage equality, the single family ordinance was pretty obviously discriminatory toward people who, you know, chose to marry someone who has the same gender designation on their license, you know. But I also think of it as like still very discriminatory for the combined reasons of people having very different, like, you know, kind of innumerably varied conceptions of what family is, as well as from a class standpoint, you know, many people are in violation of the single family ordinance because they can't afford to rent a house, especially one in town, on their own, so they split the rent with a couple of roommates.
Yeah,
and, like,
I'm in violation of the single family ordinance.
Wonderful.
So what?
So better get that moratorium passed before someone calls code enforcement on you.
Code enforcement on me, I dare you.
Yeah. You know, I'll come out with it too. I live in a place where code enforcement was called on this residence before, and the person who lived where I currently live had to move out. I think I've felt a bit bolder about talking openly about that because I've learned that y'all were advised by a lawyer that you're very vulnerable to being sued if that happens again and someone wants to take it to court. So I'm kind of like, all right, like hopefully no one will, because I'd hate to be the one suing the county, but I'm not moving out, you know? But yeah, so me too. I think I've spent most of my life in Athens living in violation of the single family ordinance, actually, because
you can afford to live on your own.
yeah. Totally. Yeah, you can't, I mean, working service industry jobs, 3 part-time jobs, there's no money for, if you start affording the house on your own, you probably just drop your 3rd job instead.
I know, exactly. Exactly.
So then you can actually hang out with your roommates and have those terribly fearful parties, you know, the parties everyone's scared of. All right, so Russell says we've got to win some state races to change the composition, balance of power in the legislature. Totally agree. Shout out to Mocha Jasmine Johnson and Jonathan Wallace running for House. Woo!
Oh, you want to go help Teddy ride his bike.
Oh, yay. Thanks, Russell. I hope you tune in later. I'd love to hear your thoughts on everywhere we've gone since you made those comments. Antonio says, keep moratorium on marijuana arrests. Keep law enforcement focused on higher priority issues. Yeah, how much can there be like a moratorium on arrest in general instead of just on violations of the so the moratorium, as I understand it, that currently exists is for anyone in violation of the ordinance you passed on Thursday, correct?
Yeah.
Could that moratorium be extended to arrests generally? Like any nonviolent offenses will not face arrest during this time?
Well, I think that direction could come down and to a certain extent have come down from the police chief.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if we could have a moratorium on arrest or change ordinances otherwise in a way that would conflict with state law. But it is to a certain degree operationally being directed that way right now.
Uh-huh.
If that makes sense. I'm trying to be very careful in the way I talk about it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I guess I wonder, so I've heard that from you and from like Kelly, essentially in the meeting on Thursday, right? Our mayor, Kelly Gertz. Is that in writing anywhere? Because that was another thing that I was hoping to see, was that, like, you know, this being said verbally on the record, you know, is one thing, but the public being able to cite a written policy of non-arrest, I think, would be stronger. Does that exist? If so, where could we find it?
So I don't think it exists in written form, other than being verbally entered into the record at our meeting on Thursday. It's something that we could look into to see if we do have powers under the state of emergency to do such at the upcoming meeting when we're kind of talking about the economic relief package. So it's something to keep in mind.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, and then Antonio says
if PA and police are on board to not enforce it, it'll be easier to send it as policy stands. Perhaps. And really the issue is whether or not we'll get sued by anyone for violating state laws. Yeah. By codifying it in a certain official manner.
Yeah. I would love to. I don't know if there's an opportunity either in private and then you share it out after, or maybe at the next meeting to just sort of ask the attorney if that's something he could look into or elaborate on. You know, because one of the things I really love about your approach to being on the commission is how much you really seek to bring the conversation out in the open, both like making it more participatory in the first place and sharing out the information you learn as you go. So yeah, I would love to see this be another thing you do that with, because you rock at that.
It's something I will look into for sure. And this is why I love doing these things. I tell you all the time, I'm not in this position because I'm particularly smart or anything like that, or I know more than other people. The only way I get smart is by listening to folks, by taking advice, by taking suggestions, by gathering ideas, and like being kind of a vessel for like our collective needs and thoughts and like possibilities and wisdom. So if you have other stuff, if anyone watching that you want to see happen or want to know if it's possible, hit me up, because that's what I love to do most about this job, is just convey your ideas to the people who know if we can do it or not, and push them to figure out ways that we can do it.
Heck yeah. And same goes for me, although I don't have the same kind of access you do. My preferred method of communication would be for people to email me at jessefораthens@gmail.com. I have a hard time keeping up with Facebook, but do you have a preferred method of communication, Mariah?
I love text messages. You can text me at 502-396-9023. I'll post that in the comments too in case you didn't catch that. That's great. Email's fine. Mariah.Parker@accgov.com. So yeah, I mean, just text me. I'm around.
All right, Farrah Brown asks, anything addressing mental health aids specifically during this time? Following up with, I noticed Starbucks was providing free therapy to their employees, with so many folks having to be quarantined with children while working from home and cleaning, etc., to others living with abusive partners, emotionally, physically, etc., to the simple psychological deterioration that comes with not being able to connect with others to the same degree we could, coupled with general cabin fever, burnout, and strained relationships, seem inevitable. I think if I can take this one first, Mariah, and then I'll defer to you on, I'll let you kind of answer to what might be happening on the governmental level with that at all, or things you're aware of. So as many of you probably know, I work at Nucci Space. Our whole mission is suicide prevention and getting people access to mental health care. We tend to focus primarily on the music and arts community in town, although we generally try to help anybody who comes through our door. You know, generally our day-to-day operation has a lot to do with people coming in to rehearse at the space, and then also people coming in to get access to mental health resources, counseling, psychiatry, etc. Under the shelter-in-place policy, we are now closed until that's lifted. So there's a phone number you can call, 706-227-1515. And that will get you in touch with Nucci Space, and someone is going to remain there to answer phones Monday to Friday from roughly 10 to 6. But generally what we're referring people to is the Georgia Crisis and Access Line. I'll grab the number for that in a second. I don't have it as memorized, and I can post them in the comments while you elaborate.
I have it right here. It's 800-715-4225.
Okay. And
I'll put that in comment.
yeah, awesome. So the Georgia Crisis and Access Line generally, again, I don't know how this is changing right now, but generally there's both people you can speak with on the phone, and if you or someone you know is in a crisis, they can actually deploy a team of social workers, not police, but like trained social workers. Generally for Athens, that team would be coming from Atlanta, so there's about a 1 hour buffer. So if it's particularly acute, you probably want to call 911. And I know I have a strong aversion to ever calling 911 and knowing that police are going to come. But there is a way to approach that call where you specifically ask for their crisis intervention response unit. And, you know, again, a part of my platform is to expand that greatly. I'd actually like to see our police department in general be that, rather than that just be a small portion of it. But for now, you can still call and request that, and at the very least, it'll make sure that that call is treated differently. But again, there's only so much control we can have about how that will unfold. And then I also see Antonio pointing out Advantage is the other place. Advantage Behavioral Health on Mitchell Bridge Road has a unit you can go to. I'll post all this stuff in the comments momentarily. Or actually, what I'll link to, so in the wake of all this, there's this thing called the Athens Mutual Aid Network has popped up, and it's kind of like an emergent product of the activist and advocacy community, kind of pooling their resources, what we know about generally, as well as what's being created right now. There's a really cool website people have created that makes it easily navigable, and that also links to a Google Doc form that's crowdsourced, so you can add to it and pull from it as needed. And oh golly, where's the? It's gonna take me a minute to. I'll wait till you're going, Mariah. But I'll actually link that here, and that has all these phone numbers, all these resources, and more, as well as some direct financial aid resources. Nucci Space is kind of shifting gears right now towards setting up a direct financial aid fund for music industry workers who are affected by this. That's where we're trying to kind of put our energy in the short term. Beyond still being available by phone to kind of talk with people and point them to other mental health specific resources. But do you have things, Mariah, that you want to share?
I mean, we're looking at devoting some of the initial $3 million that we allocated on Thursday towards various nonprofit services. I can keep in mind, as we're doing the deliberations, how mental health services are included among those. So I think that right now, that's like kind of the extent of my thinking regarding how we can help support those providers during this time. We might be seeing an uptick in patients or inquiries given some of the cabin fever we're experiencing. I also wanted to note that anyone experiencing an emotional crisis can text GA to 741-741 to communicate with a trained crisis counselor. The service is free, confidential, and available 24/7. So that's another resource in our community that people can lean upon if they need it this time, or give me a call. I'm not a counselor, but I go to therapy a lot and have learned a lot from it, and I'm happy to share things I know about dealing with overwhelm and stress with anybody who just needs a friend to talk to.
Heck yeah. Well, we've been at this for about an hour, so should we wrap up here in a minute?
Sure, that sounds good. I'll do that. It's okay. I got horror movies to watch, you know.
Yeah. No, it's funny. Like this happened to me with the music thing last night too. Although I kind of blew my voice out, but like once you get going, it's hard to want to stop. But
yeah.
Is there anything else that anybody either chatting wants to ask before we wrap up, or Mariah, did you have anything else you wanted to kind of throw at me? Or?
Well, if I may ask, I mean, what like, if we can talk, can we talk about like how your campaign's going?
Sure, yeah.
I'm really interested in like in this digital. We're living in such a digital age, and it provides us with a lot of tools. But at the same time, like face-to-face organizing has been such the bread and butter of like getting elected, especially for me. Like we just knocked on such an insane number of doors, and that made the difference between like winning and losing. And so I'm wondering how your campaign strategy is shifted now that we are all inside.
Yeah. Well, to be honest, the ideas have formed. We have kind of a plan that's not being enacted, in part because I think I've been both leaning into trying to like square away some Nucci space things, and then figuring out like personal things, kind of wrapping my head around like being in an election in this context. And I did see Chris asking for the link. I saw that you just posted that text. Chris, if you scroll up in the comments, Mariah and I both posted a couple of links as well. There's the Athens Mutual Aid Network link links to a Google Doc, and I actually put all the resources that Nucci Space most recommends in that Google Doc under a header titled mental health resources. And I'm guessing other people have probably added to that since as well. And I think they might have even, didn't they like make sections on the website itself for all the sections on that Google Doc too?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. The people doing that are like incredible. It's like, I'm blown away. So the campaign, our whole strategy was hinging heavily on door-to-door until this happened. And we suspended door-to-door operations maybe a few days before everybody was suspending everything. And I've kind of been recalibrating. So phone banking is going to play a bigger role, and I figured out how through Vote Builder to kind of set up phone bank lists that'll hopefully be effective. And I got to kind of draft up a script, and I want to share that out with the volunteers who are helping with canvassing. And we're also going to do postcards. So we want to do like a more personalized version of a mailer where people handwrite the name and address and also handwrite a message. And so I want to thank Carol Myers actually for the idea for this, but because she was kind of having people like pick people you know and you're on this list of everyone who lives in my district and write them a postcard. So we'd like to do that for both people you know and people you don't know, and really just kind of let volunteers use that text space to write kind of whatever they want with our recommended points. But obviously the front side is going to have our campaigns messaging anyway. So we're working on designing those this week. Hopefully we can receive them in the mail, assuming printing companies and mail infrastructure remain in place. Hopefully before too long we have postcards that I can give to volunteers to fill out. And for now, at least we know that we have phone banking, and then of course there's this online stuff. So I'm for my mental health, I pulled way back from social media before deciding to run, and am now leaning into it way more because it just seems like both a way to actually connect with people when it's so hard right now, and also kind of a crucial adjustment for the campaign. So we're definitely going to keep doing more of these. I'm hesitant to commit to like a regularity around pacing or timing. So we're just concluding each one of these with me announcing when the next one will be. So the next kitchen table chat is going to be on Thursday the 26th at noon. We're thinking that we would hit that lunchtime hour for folks who are still working a regular 9 to 5, whether it's remotely or in the essential businesses or on construction sites and things. I think what I kind of like about this is the whole operation of this campaign is having to adapt over and over again, and that's in a way kind of a blessing to remember our humanity in all this, and also an opportunity I think for the people who support my getting on the commission, really examining like where your power is to help already. It's going to be really hard for me to keep thinking of ways to adjust our strategy over and over again and then get it out to everyone. So the grassroots is partially about reaching out to people you don't know and partially about reaching out to people you do know. And I would encourage everybody to think about how they might do that. Social media is a great tool. Emailing is a great tool. The phone banking thing that we do will be a great tool. Many people live in neighborhoods that have a neighborhood listserv. Or otherwise, maybe there's a way to go down your streets, and we used to call this ninja-ing. Ninja-ing, where this is when Tim was running for mayor. We would canvass by day and then do Operation Ninja by night. And basically, Operation Ninja is just canvassing without knocking. So if anybody wants to take some flyers, since I have a bunch of, canvassing push cards, you want to take some and distribute them to your neighbors, maybe with a personalized note, or, a towelette to sanitize or something. I think that's kind of a great option too. I really want to ask anybody who wants to help to kind of give your idea to me on how you think you can best reach out to your network, and we'll share back what we have. But definitely email jessieforathens@gmail.com if you want to get involved. You can also go to the website, jessieforathens.com, and sign up for the mailing list that we send out regularly. There's also a link to sign up directly for volunteering there, which will basically connect you to the mailing list, but also send you a prompt for the ways you want to be involved. We haven't updated that form yet to remove canvassing, although we do hope, that we'll be able to canvass again before Election Day. Who knows if this shelter in place is going to continue past May 19th or not. But for now, that is the hope, at least. Either way, I think there's just a lot of room for us to keep reaching out to people we know, especially in a personal fashion, with a personal message, a personal text, a personalized email, and then also to try to find those people you don't know. If you have a neighborhood listserv, I can send you a draft of the type of email you could write, although I would encourage you to modify it to what fits for you. And then just send it out to everybody in your neighborhood and say, like, hey, there's a lot to think about right now, but among those things is an election on May 19th, and there's this person running to represent us against the incumbent, and you don't even have to take a position. You can just kind of treat it as like a PSA that this is happening, and people can make their own decision, and they can reach out to me as well. I got time now. I am now unemployed. So this, before it was, how do I juggle a full-time job and run for office and still be a human? And now it's, how do I not hug people and still maintain a sense of connection, because I really like hugs. So it's all about virtual hugs. Do you have any other questions about the campaign or thoughts?
If anybody else watching, wants to know how they can help you right now, we share that, because I really excited to get to serve with you.
Heck yeah. No, I really hope that we come out the other end of this with you being able to work with you to make these policies happen. Although I'll continue to be there and want to work with you in one capacity or another. It would just be nice to be able to ask the lawyer questions directly. Also, I would be remiss. I'm so bad at centering this, and it feels weird in these times because everyone's feeling a financial strain. But if you're somebody who has steady income, if you're still getting a check, from working for the university or the school district or something, we really need money on this campaign. The mailers strategy, which we're kind of having to default to, is going to require thousands of dollars that we don't have right now, and that I don't personally have at all. So for us to be able to reach people outside the internet, we're going to need donations. So if you can afford to give any amount, that would be incredibly helpful. You can donate through the website, which is jessieforathens.com, and just click the donate button. So yeah, please, if that's viable for anyone listening, or if you know somebody who you think has savings they can afford to share out, and you think that if you believe as Mariah and I do that I can make a meaningful difference for our community, short term and long term, then please share some of the dollars. Yeah, golly, I feel I always punctuate on a fundraising note because I forget, and then I have to. You got
to! I know! You gotta do it! You gotta do it!
But, life under capitalism, y'all. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing this with me, Mariah.
That's okay. This was really fun.
Heck yeah. Do you think you might want to do another one of these with me?
Yeah!
Awesome. Heck yeah. Well, let's figure out another day and time to do this together. And if anybody wants to mark your calendar or your personal alarm, then Thursday, the 26th, so this coming Thursday at noon, I will be back on with somebody. I'm actually not sure exactly who yet, but we'll announce that on the interwebs. And thank you all so much for hanging out, listening. remember that we're all connected, and I think that I want to share on a hopeful note, if that's okay. And then I would love for you to give the last word, Mariah, if that's cool. Yeah?
Yeah, fine.
Okay. I was talking to my coworker Dave about, this is when it was getting weird. It was before we started having only one person at a time at Nucci Space. And it was the last day before that, actually. And he was saying, yeah, I really hope that this is an opportunity for people to recognize like how totally interconnected we are to like the whole planet. And right now we're seeing that play out in this way where we're afraid of what this virus can do. But it's also like we are so dependent on each other to keep all this going, to keep the grid going and the water coming out of our tap and the electricity going and the internet on. And also like just how different it feels to like not instinctually like shake hands or fist bump or hug or whatever. Before the only consideration was like, are you actively vomiting? Okay. Do you want to hug? Cool, let's hug. And now it's like, whoa, like, and like I've been feeling that distance in all these real ways, but like I've also been reflecting on how like I'm actually surrounded by the efforts of like I think literally billions of people like just in this room, like just with all the shit that's been I'm not supposed to swear, but all the stuff that's been built and manufactured around me, and the food that's been grown and distributed. And I think it's really, really important for us to kind of do the airplane, like, yeah, keep the air mask on yourself, take time off social media to decompress, wash your damn hands, and also keep finding ways to connect with other people and share your vulnerability, share your fear, and also share your power.
Absolutely. I think my final word would be something along those very same lines in terms of how inspired I feel by the creativity with which we are finding ways to support each other. We're playing Call of Duty together, but maybe we don't do that normally. We're watching horror movies on Discord, but maybe that's not generally our thing. We're FaceTiming people. We're texting our friends we haven't heard from in a while. We're sending people money on Cash App. We're using all these tools that we have and take for granted to support each other in all these novel ways, and it just reminds me of how resilient our community is, how caring we are, and how creative we are. And like, you feel unsafe that we're gonna get through this fine, and like we're gonna come out the other side of it better because we'll have taken seriously and and integrated into our normal social life all of these creative ways of supporting one another and moving forward with that knowledge, directly in hand. So keep innovating, keep supporting each other in these crazy, interesting, never before thought of ways. Don't take it for granted. It's amazing. Like, marvel at how amazing it is what we're doing, and wash your damn hands.